Hey guys, so I wanted to try to do something, I've actually wanted to do this for a long time now, and that's to do a piece inspired by the scary stories to tell in the dark, illustrations by Stephen Gammell. Now, I know I'm not going to get down exactly his style because it's so unique, and there's just so many things that he has going on, but I wanted to try to emulate at least some of the techniques that he has and some of the themes that he kind of has throughout his art pieces here. There are a lot of awesome pieces inspired by Stephen Gammell's work online. Some are digital. One of the best ones I've come across is from Painting with Jane, and she does an acrylic painting in his style, and it's amazing. I will be sure to link that below. These illustrations had a huge impact on me as a kid. I think they did for a lot of children. It was a part of growing up, and they just really stuck with me. And it was some of my first introductions to anything that was terrifying, anything that was kind of abstract. Anyway, so again, I know that we're not going to copy exactly his style or his technique or come to a piece quite like any of his, but we're going to use something in his technique inspired by that to create something new and just kind of see where we end up, and we're going to go from there. As for what Stephen Gammell actually used, there's not a lot of information. There's not a lot of interviews with him or videos of him and his process. But one user on Reddit, Paper Trails, actually said that it looks mostly like graphite powder with an eraser, like you can see right here, and also taking alcohol and adding that to the graphite and creating some of those darker areas. One of the key things that we notice in the scary stories illustrations is this really kind of misty, ghosty quality here. It kind of fades in and out from the lights to these midtones and the deep darks. We see that here. And then we also see it in a piece like this. And this is another key characteristic of his work. It's these kind of almost look like hairs or these drips or drops here. And that might be achieved by the brush and also might be achieved by just the graphite pencil being very thin. We'll see what happens when we work on the actual piece here. Another aspect of his work is sometimes this real surreal, abstract quality that he has, especially in the last book. You can see he just goes off the rail, and there's a lot for a child to take in, but it's a really awesome style. With that, let's talk about the materials that I'll use, and then we'll get started on the actual illustration. The materials I'll be using today are a Strathmore Bristol paper, various cheap brushes. I got these ones at Target. You don't need anything too complicated for this. That being said, I do have a Winsor Newton 1 mechanical pencil. This is 0.7 millimeter HB. A small eraser. You can click this one out. This is 2.3 millimeters. Various graphite pencils. I'm mostly going to use the ranges in the B's. Tissues, rubbing alcohol, and sandpaper. I'm going to start off by using the sandpaper, and I'm going to use various sizes of graphite pencils. This is a 9B. So I'm going to take the sandpaper, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get some of that graphite into these different sections so I can use them as a powder. So all I'm going to do is going to take a little bit of this brush here. And I'm going to start to move some of it on the Bristol board, just like this. Now, some of this is going into the Strathmore Bristol board. Some of it you can see is still moving around. I think because it is a smooth surface. Now, looking at his art, I don't see a whole lot of grit to the paper. And you need at least some of that in order for this to catch. But otherwise, we're going to do what we're doing now, which is on a smooth surface. Eventually, you'll get it in there. It just takes a little bit more work. If you had something with a lot more tooth, it would go in there pretty quickly. The teeth would catch it. But again, that's not really represented in his art. So we're going to refrain from doing that. Now this is very subtle at this point. That's okay. We're going to have more of a subtle look. Some of his pieces, they do have those really dark black spots, but others are a lot more subtle. They're kind of a lot of gray and light tones. I have an idea of what I want to do on this one. I kind of sketched that out beforehand, not in this style, but we'll see if we can accomplish that. I'm going to use the tissue to really kind of press it in a little bit more. You don't really need too much pressure, doesn't seem, but yeah, there we go. I am going to lay in some of the sketch here, but before I do that, I'm just going to get an idea here for something later I'm going to put in. At this point, I am going to lay in the actual sketch here. Now, some of this will get much darker as we go on. But it's just going to give me a rough idea. And I'm keeping it really light here. And the reason being is because even this moon, which will change in a little bit to meet those surreal characteristics, it was a little hard to achieve, and I think it might be the actual paper. I don't think it's the eraser itself. I think that smooth, once it's in there, I think it's smooth Bristol paper. I think once it's in there, it's hard for it to really get out. So we're going to see how successful this is. If the technique works, it would be interesting to see what it would look like with different kinds of paper and maybe different kinds of graphite even, but I think it'll give us the effect we're looking for regardless. One of the things I did notice while looking through the book there was that some of those look like they're Xeroxed pretty heavily. So that definitely will increase the contrast. So those darks, those blacks, those are easier to achieve with a Xerox kind of process. Think about any of those copiers that you've used before, and if you have tried to copy any drawings, either black and white in color, you know the exposure on that and the contrast is just crazy. And it kind of looks like for some of those, that's the effect. And it makes printing a lot easier, I think, sometimes too. You don't have to have all the fine details. So if you have a drawing that can work really well with high contrast. It's, I think the publisher probably would be super happy about that. This almost looks not stylized enough. We'll mess with it. We'll mess with it enough so it'll get to that point. Something to keep in mind as I'm doing that. Usually it's a lot more craggly, kind of like this. We'll see if we can kind of change that on that one here in just a bit. I'm not too concerned about this having a direct border coming all the way to the edge here. Even this, I might not go all the way here. Some of the illustrations that he has, in fact, a lot of them actually seem to have this kind of vignette. But it definitely doesn't go all the way to the edge many times. It kind of fades in and out. What's nice about this kind of style, if we go light enough, is it's really easy to fix any of your mistakes. Or your spooky accidents. Now that I have that sketch more planned out, I'm going to come back with some of the graphite. We're going to continue to build before we actually put some sketch lines in there. So I'm going to start with 4B. And we're just going to start put down some of our graphite, and we're going to build up on top of it here. I'm not worried too much about it being sketchy because I'm going to come over with that brush anyways, and we're going to let most of the eraser fill in our highlights. In fact, if we have it too detailed right now, I don't think we would achieve that style that he has. A lot of the really thin lines that we see look very, very deliberate. And my guess is that they are put in near the end. So we're going to also try to do that. One neat thing about this style is I don't think there's a lot of rulers or anything like that involved. It's very go with the flow. It's very freeing. One of the articles that I did read when discussing work on the book, and I think a lot of people just assume that a lot of artists get into a really dark space and almost a really depressive state. And I think sometimes that's true with a lot of artists, or especially some actors maybe, that really get into like a method kind of style. But from all accounts that I've seen, it looked like he had a lot of fun working on those books, and I think some of it was he thought some of the, and they are in a way, you know, there is a lot of dark humor to those books, but as a kid, maybe you don't pick up on that as much. It's just kind of terrifying. It's still terrifying, to be honest. Okay. That's gross. I'm sure other people have experienced that though too, when you just have like somehow some hair, either eyelash or pet, just gets in your work, and I have to admit that happens to me almost every time I'm working on somehow something traditional or digital. A hair always ends up, and it's just part of the process, I guess. So really, like working with graphite or any colored pencil, this is kind of the way you would go about it anyways. You kind of work on some midtones and then work up to some of the darks. I mentioned this in a previous video, but one of the things I used to do a lot when I was first starting off, and if I wanted something dark, I would take, for example, something like this, and I would just push as hard as I could into the paper. And I didn't honestly know until much later that, yeah, don't do that. And the reason is you damage the paper. So, it might seem like you're trying to get like a shortcut and just put something as dark as you can immediately, but the paper gets damaged when you do that. So if you try to lay anything over that to make it even darker, it has a really hard time doing that. So the best way is to not destroy your paper, and just kind of gradually put tones in and work up to those darker values. In just a bit, we're going to go over this and everything that we've done here with our brush, kind of blend everything together. You know, it might seem like a huge mess at first, but that's okay because, again, what really will clean everything up is going to be that eraser. So if everything kind of looks muddied for a while, if you're trying this process out and you try to do the same thing, don't worry. It's something that's a lot more forgiving than some other styles. There are some aspects that we'll get to that you kind of have to commit to it once you do it. This is not one of those steps, though. I'm going to put some more graphite powder over this as we build up. And it will catch in some of the other areas that we've already sketched graphite into. It's getting there. You can start to see, especially over here, it's really getting more of that foggy kind of appearance. It's going to be more noticeable when we finally do put an eraser in there too. I'm also going to use the tissue. I'm going to go over everything. Give me an idea, because after working on this for a little while, you might not notice how subtle some of those values are. So comparing this to our white paper that hasn't been touched yet, you can see the difference. Sometimes working on something like that, it is it happens so gradually. You don't even notice it. So it is good to kind of step back and do that every once in a while. The more we put in, the more little smudges and things. I'm going to do my best to not mess up the work like that, but it's really hard not to with graphite and graphite powder sometimes. I'm trying to also steady this so it doesn't move around too much for the capture. Put another one right there. It is also interesting too. I don't know if anybody feels this way, but it kind of seems to go a couple different ways with artists you're trying to emulate. Some have a very simple style that many artists look at and they say, oh, I can do that. I can easily do that, and I can, who knows, maybe do it better, right? And when they actually try to emulate that style, they realize very quickly how difficult that is. There might be something with proportions, if it's figures, or something with the technique, maybe a combination of all those things. But there's also the artists that are very, very intimidating. And those that are super, super intimidating, sometimes I will do something else, which is, oh man, I could never do that, right? It's a totally different kind of thinking. And you kind of prevent yourself from actually trying it because you just figure, they're good, I'll never be that good. Or I can never achieve because I don't even know where to begin looking at that artist's style and how they achieve what they achieve. I don't, I don't even know where to begin, and I'll never be as good, so what's the point? But I think either kind of mindset gets you in a maybe not the healthiest mindset to create something, right? You're like, oh, I can do that, and I'm gonna do it almost like to prove I'm better than this artist. Not always, but sometimes people will do that. Or get in the mindset where they're just not creating something, or they're not trying because they see an artist. And I've done this numerous times where I've seen people draw or paint something. I'm just like, well, I will never be that good, so I am just gonna do something else now. And it's really kind of discouraging, and you don't do anything. Unfortunately, that's the worst part, is instead of maybe potentially creating something that is either just as good or in a different way. It's different art, and different things strike people in different ways. And I mean, if you ever do go to an art show, or I read a lot of comics, and there are some artists that I love that other people are just like, that is the worst style. I hate everything about that. And it's okay, it's okay looking at it from that perspective when it's not you. It is harder to take when it is you, right? When somebody's just like, I really don't like that style. I don't like what you've done here. I don't like your choices. There's a lot of that in art school too. It's like, there's a lot of questioning, and for at some point it is good to question like why you're doing things, and why you make the choices that you do, and just recognizing, hey, in the future, maybe try this, maybe this would be more effective, and like good criticism and effective criticism that you can take to make yourself better, instead of just being like, I don't like you as a person. It's kind of hard sometimes for people to separate that. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying there is not to get too discouraged, or just a reminder, we all get discouraged, but just a reminder that creating in general will lead to something not only productive, because that can be kind of a tricky thing to even talk about with art, like in your productivity, like what are you doing with your art, and how, I don't even want to say that too much because I know that's a stressor for a lot of people, but just kind of going down that rabbit hole of what people are expected to do when they do art. Instead of just being like, hey, I tried this, and sometimes your outcome is actually, you almost surprise yourself, because if you do a lot of kind of negative self-talking, you don't expect much out of yourself, right? And it almost is a, validation for your creative side to realize, oh, okay, I actually can do some things, I'm, even if it's a part of some of your illustrations or art, it's always hard to go back and look at your old art, because you've learned, and you see what you could improve. But a lot of times when I do that, there are some things that I like to try to find for myself, like, I like the way I did this specific, like, I like the way I did the water here. I like the way I did the cloth. I like these certain aspects, and it's a good thing to really learn from. So you can say, oh, I like the way I did this. How can I make everything else look that way? And then just work towards that. Okay. So I'm going to use more of the tissue. Kind of go over some areas here. And see, it will look like all that work we've just done is going away. But it's really not, so we don't need to worry. Think of it like, if you're familiar with Photoshop, like a layer in Photoshop. And we're just going to build on top of that. But before we do that, we need to really make sure this is this really misty kind of quality here. Okay. We're going to come in again with some more darks. Now, I kind of need to watch out for my hand. Luckily, I'm not doing it too much, but I am a very lazy artist, and I drag my hand through everything I do. Usually it's not a huge issue, except when you're working with graphite powder, and that stuff gets everywhere. So, because of that, I do need to be a little bit more mindful of it. For some of this, I might put in some of the seeds for the dark spots to come, like this guy. This tree, I'm at the point where I'm putting in just the blueprints for those really kind of hairy, craggly lines there. Coming in, graphite and tissue. Look how faded this is getting here. So it's, without doing a whole lot, just adding some of these layers, it's definitely getting some atmosphere. Whether we like it or not, it kind of blends together, and I could see where the hardest part of this style is just knowing when to stop, knowing how many layers to build up and when to stop with that. All right. Now, before this gets too dark, I actually do want to come in and use my eraser here. Just going to get some ideas of some of the highlights of these clouds. It's an interesting way to work because for a lot of people, they go the opposite way. But with this kind of style, you definitely need to think in your head, okay, what needs to be my lights, and make sure you don't make those too dark. But also not to be afraid to come back with the eraser, because that's how you achieve this kind of style. So it's kind of a memory game sometimes. I had those clouds actually pretty, I guess you would say like typical, right? But let's get a little bit more jagged with that. Let's start to make it look like there's more mist and atmosphere going on than just our typical fluffy clouds, right? Because this is supposed to be a little bit spookier, so it's okay if we don't have our typical nice looking white clouds. Give the illusion here that it's not just one pair of clouds and then it just is flat. Get some depth here. That there's definitely some other clouds around, and that they're far away, and some are closer, some are in between, and it's a really nice effect. I'm going to add some more those mid-tones down here. And the reason why is we're going to create some mist here in a little bit. So it'll help us with some of that depth. Also, if you notice, it'll create some of that depth when we're looking at the clouds here too. Okay. Again, I'm going to come in. Clouds are another thing that, like our tree branches there, that you don't want them to be too symmetrical, or unless that's a style you're going for. Like you think of like the Toy Story clouds, something like that are really stylized, right? That's perfect for that. But for something like this, that we want it to look a little bit more organic, doesn't work well. All right. Okay. We're going to start applying some of these pretty dark areas now. So I'm going to start with a 4B. We'll see if we need to go darker with each try here. So basically what we're doing throughout this piece, and the part that can be discouraging when you basically blend everything together and make more of a mid-tone. So for quite a while it will seem like you're not advancing anywhere. And I should have been more descriptive about that when I was saying don't get discouraged earlier, because that's what's might make you think that way, that everything just kind of comes back to those mid-tones. But after a while, like, I knew with that last tissue go over with the mid-tones that it was ready to go in with some of our darks. And I don't want this to be completely black anyways, because I'm going to do something a little interesting with the moon that I think is very much in his style. I'm going to make it a little surreal. Just to achieve that style, I might come back a little bit with the tissue here. Now, he doesn't always do that like we were looking earlier. I could actually see some of his graphite kind of sketchy looks there. So he kind of picks and chooses when he does this really soft kind of look, and then other times when he goes in and does more of a sketchier kind of look. Seems like for a lot of the creatures that he does a little bit more of a sketchy appearance in some of their values. And that makes sense. For this kind of stuff, he keeps it a lot more atmospheric with the really soft mid-tones and lights. Come back, I probably will actually come back and get some more of those highlights out of the clouds. Okay. We're gonna go with some of the more surreal aspects of this piece here. Now, once this is on here, this will not be erased. I did forget to mention earlier, too, that I have been replenishing my graphite powder. So, if you're trying this style out, you might want to start with, you can actually just go and buy some, but you might want to start out with quite a bit, just so you don't have to stop. Depends on how big of a mess you're willing to make, too. I'm trying not to do anything too crazy. If I cannot make a mess, I will definitely try not to. But some of it is just kind of inevitable. kind of coming up to the finish here. Now looking at this picture through my phone, the camera on my phone, the exposure is turned up a little bit. And it does make me, again, think about that Xerox and if that had any part to play in this, the look of this specific style. Just the darks are a little bit, just slightly darker, and the contrast is a little bit higher. It's a little bit more subtle in the actual piece here. Both kind of have an interesting look to them. But I'm gonna try to get it so it's looking on this piece when I take a picture of it like it does in the video, so it's representative of that a little bit more there. So we're at our finished piece here, and it is what we set out to do. It's inspired by Stephen Gammell, but of course it's not going to be confused with any of his work. But it was fun to kind of throw in some of the themes there, some of the more drips and the drops that he has. If I were to do this again, I think I would get an even smaller brush and use that for some of the drips. I think that's really what he used to get some of those, some of the lines in the trees there, and his actual drops that he has. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for staying with me. I know it was a longer video, and I hope you did enjoy it. And I also have my social media. It's all linked below. I'm most active on Instagram, so you can check me out there. I'm iangoudelock basically on all of my social media there. If you did like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like. And if you aren't subscribed yet, you could hit that subscribe button. That way you can see more videos from me in the future. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one.